Hello and welcome to the show today. Today we're going to be previewing the upcoming American Society for Gene and Cell Therapy Policy Summit. And our guest is Francesca Cook. Francesca is the Vice President of Market Access at REGENXBIO. So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to give you some more background about the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy's upcoming policy summit, which is being held in Washington, D.C. on September 18th and 19th. The Policy Summit connects attendees with leaders and decision makers throughout the regulatory, policy, and government relations world. The perspectives discussed at ASGCT's Policy Summit inform regulatory, legislative, and payment policies that impact cell and gene therapy development. It's hard to believe that the ASGCT Policy Summit's already in its fifth year, and this year's lineup is one of the best we've seen. There are one-on-one conversations with Nicole Verdun, the new director of FDA's Office of Therapeutic Products, Laura McWright from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, and Renee Wegersen from the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health are just a few of the incredible speakers scheduled to participate at this event. So if you are involved in developing and commercializing novel cell and gene therapies, ASGCT's Policy Summit is a must-attend event, and there's still time to register. Check out the full program and register online at asgct.org/policy summit. That's all one word. And I'll also leave the link in the show notes for this podcast episode. Now, please join me in welcoming Francesca to the podcast today. Francesca is going to give us a preview of what to expect at this year's ASGCT Policy Summit. Maybe to get started, could you tell us a little bit about your background? And I know you've attended the Policy Summit for many years, so tell us a little bit about your background and your experience with the ASGCT Policy Summit.
Sure. So I've been in the field, gene therapy field, since 2016. And soon after entering kind of this industry, I became a member of ASGCT, the American Society for Gene and Cell Therapy, and shortly thereafter became a member of the Government Relations Committee. So I served on the committee for a number of years, also chaired it for a couple of years as well. And the Policy Summit was really the brainchild of the first chairperson of the committee, Rachel Saltzman. And I think her thinking was that the gene and cell therapy field was growing, moving toward products coming to the commercial space, had a base of individuals who'd been working in ASGCT in the gene and cell therapy field for a long time, from academia, and also now was growing kind of with industry members. And it would be a really good idea to bring kind of the ASGCT membership to Washington to be able to engage with really policymakers. And so it's kind of like the ability for cross-pollination. So the membership could begin to learn more about kind of the policy, kind of regulations and policies that would impact the advancement, both the research, development, and commercialization of kind of these new novel products, and also an opportunity to enable policymakers, whether they're from Congress or from the executive branch, the federal agencies, to kind of learn about gene and cell therapies, how they were different, and kind of the promise that they could bring to kind of the medical kind of therapeutic marketplace. So it was really an opportunity to kind of bring that, cross-fertilization, pollination for both policymakers and for the ASGCT membership. And, I was there for the inaugural summit, have been attending ever since, and have served both as the moderator for a number of panels and co-chairperson of the event itself.
It's a great overview. And I know that you have been actively involved and had chaired a number of panels at the Policy Summit in the past. So what is the Policy Summit all about? How can you distill it down for our listeners? What is this Policy Summit really all about?
Yeah, so I think it's all about kind of learning, engaging, and the sharing of information. And I think when you work in kind of the drug development field, you may be, actively working kind of in a lab or in manufacturing or at the academic kind of level, very early kind of R&D. Or even, in commercial companies where you're still in the development stage. And while you are focused on kind of your day-to-day activities, I think the policy arena impacts everything from research and development when you're thinking about NIH and kind of funding through, kind of FDA when you're thinking about, bringing your product to FDA for eventual kind of approval and all of the data and evidence that's kind of required. And then certainly on the commercial side, then, Medicare and Medicaid are huge, payers for healthcare services. And so their kind of policies will impact the ability for patients to ultimately access these therapies. So I think the Policy Summit is an opportunity really for learning. And so for those who are not as familiar with kind of the policy side, they get a chance to understand and engage with those who work in that arena and learn about what the implications are. And I think for the policymakers, gene and cell therapy, this is a very new area. It's different. These are meant to be, kind of one-time durable therapies. Our healthcare system is not really set up for them. And we found that some of the issues and challenges that we talked about early on several years ago in terms of the current financing system or even kind of regulatory policy, that we've seen changes. And, a couple of the changes, that I think we've talked about early on and kind of we're part of the discussion that has led some policy changes that, RMAT is an example where that's kind of this, regenerative medicine pathway at FDA. That's very helpful to enable, companies to engage more earlier and regularly with, kind of FDA to really help shepherd those products through, or something like even value or outcomes-based contracts. And we've seen, CMS now looking at that specifically for gene and cell therapies. And so it really is an opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, for kind of that cross-pollination, fertilization, discussion, engagement that can lead to both learning and education and real policy changes.
So Francesca, for those people who are attending the conference live in Washington, D.C. in mid-September, who can they expect to meet and interact with?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the membership and the participation in the conference, you have folks from all across kind of industry, academia, and those who are in research. You've got those who have a lot of knowledge on kind of the policy side and those who are kind of just learning. So there's a real mix of industry, academic, and research related participants. And then on the policy side, this year we really have an exciting lineup where we have representatives from, FDA, from CMS, from ARPA-H, really exciting. And then we also have a fireside chat with a congressional staffer. So I think there's a really good opportunity to see up close and hear from those on the policy arena. And it's really hard to have those conversations on your own, kind of doing your day-to-day job. So being able to actually have them in person participating in the conference gives you an opportunity to both hear kind of what they're thinking about and what initiatives are upcoming, and also the opportunity to ask questions and engage. So it's a really nice, I think, mix of both, the policy side and then those who are in traditional kind of drug development.
So that's a great overview. And as we look closer, let's dive in a little closer now into the Policy Summit agenda. What are the key sessions from your perspective that are most interesting to you from your role?
Yeah, well, it's great. There are so many actually this year. It's hard to just name a few, but I would say that one, it will be really exciting to have the opportunity to talk to Nicole Verdun, who is now taking over the Office of Therapeutic Products at FDA. There's been a kind of a revamping of that office. And so getting a chance to actually kind of meet the new head and kind of hear about her thoughts for going forward, I think will be really interesting. I think obviously CMS, incredible that they'll be able to have CMS kind of represented at the conference this year. CMMI, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, now has a whole new initiative that's really focused on outcomes-based, value-based contracts, specifically targeted to gene and cell therapies. This is new. This is dynamic. This has a lot of implications for industry. And I think hearing more about how CMS plans to go about kind of executing kind of this new initiative it's certainly very much in the news and being talked about, and being able to hear from CMS directly, I think is a phenomenal kind of get for ASGCT. I also think it'll be interesting to hear from the folks at ARPA-H. So I think a lot of people are very familiar with DARPA and DARPA's work on the defense side, and how a lot of innovation and creative ideas have come out of DARPA. And so now there's an opportunity to kind of recreate that kind of out of the box thinking in the healthcare arena. And so hearing from, ARPA-H staff on how that might be relevant for gene and cell therapies, I think is kind of new. And I'm interested to hear their take on kind of some healthcare innovations. I also am always interested in the patient-related panels that we've had at ASGCT, and there are a couple of them. There's certainly one talking with FDA and others about kind of patient preference and patient-reported outcomes, and how we ensure that in our clinical studies and trials that we incorporate the patient voice and the patient experience. And this is something I think that is really important. And now FDA's, increasing kind of their focus and interest on including these types of data. And so I think that'll be a great panel. And then there's a later panel where you'll have those from the kind of patient community talking about kind of challenges and hurdles and experiences in accessing gene and cell therapies now that a number of them have been approved. And I think, we will all fail as a community if these new, novel, exciting, transformative products aren't able to actually get to the people who need them. And so it's always important to listen to those who have real world experiences right now, what's happening, so that we can work together to kind of overcome those challenges and get these products to people.
Well, Francesca, you're exactly right. I want to build on that for a moment, because everyone that I've met in the cell and gene therapy field is so passionate about patient access. And we know there are many challenges and barriers. And at this year's Policy Summit, as you've indicated, we'll hear from experts that discuss these issues related to reimbursement challenges and policy developments and how they impact patient access. What should we be looking to learn specifically from those sessions?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. Well, another session that we have will actually be on coding and reimbursement 101, because I think sometimes people think that once you get your product approved by FDA, then, everything is, sunshine and roses and everybody will get access to your product. But in reality, that's just one key factor. Once you have that FDA approval, ensuring that payers, whether it's Medicare or Medicaid or commercial insurers, actually are willing to cover your product and pay for your product is really important. And coding is actually a really key component to ensuring your products will be able to be actually reimbursed. And so, I mentioned earlier that, one of the great benefits of the Policy Summit is that it's a really good opportunity to learn and grow. And so I think having those in industry understanding the importance of coding and how it actually impacts reimbursement, is really important. And then companies can really plan to ensure in their kind of commercial strategies that they're thinking about, just kind of like fundamental building blocks like coding, early on.
So based on your experience from attending previous policy summits, what can attendees expect to take away from this meeting?
I think that, just continuing that learning and growing theme, I think it gives you an opportunity to really immerse yourself in policy topics. Often this is new to many of the folks who are participating, but it becomes, an area of further learning and interest after participating in the policy summit. So I think it's kind of the opportunity to learn. It's also an opportunity to engage kind of with your peers. With COVID, we haven't had those opportunities as much. And so while we had the summit remote and then partially remote or kind of in person over the last couple of years, there's nothing, you really can't compare the remote experience to actually being in the room with peers where you can actually have kind of conversations and engage and network. So I think that's, really important and a great opportunity as well. And I think, we mentioned all of the policy participants from, FDA and CMS and, ARPA-H and Congress. You just don't get the opportunity to hear from those in government specifically talking about gene and cell therapy issues very often. And so it's really a great opportunity to hear firsthand from those who are making policies that are going to, impact both, research and development, but also commercialization of these products.
Well, Francesca, as you know, the ASGCT membership has grown significantly, attendance has grown significantly, as well as for the policy summit. So final question is, what suggestions do you have for especially first-time attendees coming to the policy summit for the first time? What should they do? What are your suggestions to help them maximize their experience at the summit?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is kind of like listening and, and asking questions. You have an opportunity to not only hear from the participants in the panels, but you have the opportunity to engage. And I think really taking advantage of the opportunity to engage by kind of asking questions, by, kind of networking at the break. And then, afterwards, reaching out to those that you've met for continued communication. The ASGCT Policy Summit's a great opportunity for all of that.
Well, I thank you for your time to do a quick preview and rundown of the Policy Summit agenda. And I know our listeners will really appreciate it. I know I'm looking forward to listening in, and I hope you have a great rest of the day and have a great weekend. Thanks, Francesca.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. And I wanted to come back and just remind everyone that if you're able to get to Washington, D.C. for the Policy Summit, you can still register. There's still time to register to attend in person. But ASGCT is also offering a completely virtual attendance option to those of you who can't be there in person. If you're already familiar with ASGCT, you know the quality of the programming. But if you're unfamiliar, or maybe this is your first policy summit, this is a perfect opportunity to learn what this incredible organization is all about. See the full program and agenda and register online at asgct.org/policy summit, or check the show notes for the link to access the registration portal on the ASGCT website.